All right, we're having another conversation with Mondo Monkey. I've got a graphic on the screen. This is straight from the site. Nothing particular there, but love the feel of mondomonkey.com. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, definitely take a quick look. Lucas, I'm excited for this show. I know you're equally excited.
Absolutely. So glad to have you back, Mondo. Looking forward to wander into whatever corners of a Mondo world, or Mondo history that we might come across. Mondo, good morning. What's on your mind?
Good morning. Well, I'm telling you, it's exciting. There's a E. E. Cummings poem. I can remember only that I used to memorize it. I had it memorized by heart before, and I don't even know if I can get the beginning done right correctly. But if I were to, it'll be a great beginning of the show, because it went something like this. I thank you, God, for most this amazing day. And I'm telling you, I love that way of beginning a poem because it's kind of like there is something magical. There's something just absolutely magical. Who in the hell figured it out? I don't know how it worked out, but I'm telling you, that whole 24-hour rhythm, the idea of a beginning, middle, and end, the whole thing, all that can be done. A day is a damn good thing to have, and it's really good to live one at a time, they keep saying. And when all of that's being said and done, I'm jumped straight into what I want to say was one of my profound experiences this morning, was reconnecting to and getting a little bit deeper into an artist who's had a lot of influence on me, it turns out, in one way or another. And there's millions of them, but this guy in particular today is hitting strong. His name is Saul Steinberg. And in the 60s, you would see elements of his cartoon and illustration style all over the place because he was an illustrator for New Yorker. But I realized Mondo has definitely been influenced by his attitude and his kind of his whimsical style. And today I looked at a documentary done of him in 1967 talking about his creative process, and it's like pow, there it is. That's how it works. Basically, that interaction where an artist is trying to find a way to create something that is answering to something inside of him, but he doesn't even know how to do it. He doesn't know where to begin, and he just has to start. And then you get into it, and kind of like this conversation and this show just started. We have no freaking idea where we're going, but ultimately, that's the nature of our experience anyway. In it, you got to start finding the groove to it, the rhythm to it, see where you're taking it. Lord have mercy, hopefully you get good at that. And in the end, that's what I think Mondo's about, trying to take all these interesting places that we become the nexus of, and very uniquely so. And how do we make music out of that? That's the art of Mondo. And that's the art that everybody gets to, in their own way, play, because everyone is a unique facet, a unique perspective on this giant, wonderful thing we all share. And a day is where we get to all do it together. So, good morning, guys.
I love that you have referenced E. E. Cummings. I don't know Saul Steinberg. I'll have to dig into him. But E. E. Cummings was a was a poet that I tortured all of my English teachers with throughout my life. Because when I discovered him, and that you didn't have to capitalize everything according to, like this begins the sentence. I love the way that E. E. Cummings broke the world rules, and sometimes I think this is also part of Mondo. Mondo starts with breaking the time rule, living backwards. But
Absolutely, absolutely. And being able, by the way, those one of the things that happens, and you're really good at this, is you begin to build relationships with people outside of time. In other words, in some sense, in the slowest, most basic way of passing information through time is, obviously through writing or some kind of marks on a wall or something. And then somebody in some place of time, they can access those things and they can begin to read. You can read the Odyssey, you can read histories, you can read biographies, you can observe art from other times. And so in a way, everyone's time traveling. They're just not aware that they're just a unique kind of thing that does that by nature. And when you build up enough of these relationships, you start seeing these different harmonies. And E. E. Cummings is definitely somebody who, with language, opened up new doors to allow, it's just, and all what artists are often doing is reminding us of the insane spaciousness that's available if you just sometimes. Actually, Saul Steinberg, in a documentary that I shared on Mondo's timeline this morning, he says something very important that's interesting about artists. There's like an element, and I think it kind of connects to that determined, shareable world that we have, and then that indeterminate world that we have. It's so important to have that shared world where you kind of have to wear the mask and you kind of have to conform in some way so that you can become, communicable. You can communicate things, you can share and do things. But the artist, his world, his or her world is like not like in that public world. It's like some other kind of alchemy that's going on. And the tools we have to do that today are just marvelous. And the stories that we get to share and tell, and some of them are just, some of us just can't help but want to, we're just like radiating with them. And so artists, I think, are just have so much capacity to want to share something. They're looking for ways and tools to do it. And I guess that's what Mondo's doing. And that's what we're all doing in some way.
Yeah, I pulled up a work of Saul Steinberg. He looks to me like an American and an American Salvador Dali in a way, but I can definitely see his impact
Well,
on.
he really taught. He goes on to he's a Romanian Jewish immigrant to New York in the 40s, I think, and it's just it's a really interesting time at that time, and he's just like finding a language. I when I hear him talking, he's finding a language to sort of like express things that are difficult to express, feelings, and he is always feeling sort of like an immigrant in a way. He really enjoys the idea of having to go to different, like he got jobs to go to different places in the US and just draw things. He had a lot of like just observing, and as a kind of an outsider from the beginning, he was like, I don't know, he really is, he's got some marvelous stuff. He does some amazing like psychoanalytical artistry when he gets fascinated by uh anyway, Freudian stuff. But there's also that one trippy dude, God, who was that guy that they ended up? He made like the Ergonon machine, and he was Reich, Dr. Reich. That's a very interesting character in the 30s and 40s. They finally had to snuff him out. He was too controversial. But yeah, there you have that.
Wait a second. What's the Ergonon machine, and what was he
Organon,
controversial?
I think it was called Organon. Anyway, it's a dude. He was a renegade psychoanalytic member, like in that early group of like Jung, Freud, and like that kind of group. And he's quite a trippy character, but he claimed to have discovered and create some kind of machine that created some kind of material called organon, I think it's called. He also claimed to be able to, this is in the like 40s, to be able to sort of like with some similar type of machine make rain fall out of the sky, so forth and so on. And he was also very controversial in his theories about sexuality, and he just was a total complete controversial character. But he was getting some popularity, and his machines and therapies were doing some good. But at that time he became too controversial ultimately. And I guess it's fair to say he was snuffed out. He was rubbed out. Literally. So yeah, go do some research on him, it's interesting.
Tell me his name again, because
Dr. Reich. I forget his first name, but if you Reich and put sexologist, that should probably get somewhere. I should be on my computer typing. Damn it, let me get on here. Come on, computer.
I
Let
think
me
I
tell you.
found him. Is it this guy, Wilhelm Reich?
Yeah, that's him. That's him.
All right.
You should like of obscure but nonetheless like significant characters that have jumped into Mondo's life. This is one that I paid attention to enough to be able to conjure him back into existence. And there are interesting things about him, and particularly one of the things about him that helps us, that needs to be reminded to people, that there have been and there continuously will be times when people will say something other people don't like, and it used to be, and it shouldn't be, that now's the time to go and rub those people out. It kind of does happen that way. You know, there's been very significant and important characters. Tesla's another very good example of people who have interesting ideas, but for some people they're not the ideas that they want to have and they get persecuted. And John Nash is another one. People wonder, oh, you know, John Nash went crazy, blah blah blah, and yada yada. You know, the beautiful mind John Nash, who basically is a very important, you know, person in game theory, and wrote up that essay we were talking about last time about ideal money. Very interesting guy who basically got to the Austrian School of Economics in his own roundabout way and was proving it in his own with his own tools. All of these guys have been, and many others, brilliant people, get themselves. Oh, Alan Turing's another one. They get themselves being necessary for states activities that are like, you know, stuff that you don't really want to have to mess around with if you're a brilliant mind, but ultimately you almost get channeled and forced to do this kind of stuff, and it's a terrible thing that happens. And I just wanted to bring that out. So that's another topic we can go on and on about. But with people who stop thinking the way you're supposed to, and they get in a lot of trouble for doing that, I just think that's a crime in and of itself right there.
Well, I think part of why some of these topics are tamped down by societies is because you know when we talk about societies, in some ways it's like how do you secure the things that you've done in your life to pass them down to your children, and some, you know, novel sexual ideas or whatnot obfuscate the ability to pass things from generation to generation. Do you? I was when I was looking through the Saul Steinberg prints, sort of on my own here. One of them seemed to me very Aztec, for lack of a better word, Aztlanish. Are you familiar with the Moche down in South America? The Moche. Some people say Mochi, Mochi.
Tell me more. I mean, by the way, all the knowledge I have really is, I swear to God, the way I conjure it up is very LLM like. You've got to double check, triple check, maybe even quadruple check your facts with me, but not because I'm not aiming to get to something that I have spinning around in the soup of my memories, but that, you know, you might want to, if you want to get more, resolution, you'll have to do your own stuff. But tell me more about them, and then I'll tell you what I might know.
Well, the Mochi were in the north of Peru, near Chavín de Huántar, down on the coast. And they just left a lot of pottery behind, and some of that pottery was termed to be very macabre by early interpretations of it, you know, sacrifices and all sorts of things. And later somebody came around and took a look at it and said, "Wait a second, these look like orgies."
Got it.
And so a lot of it had been misinterpreted, misinterpreted, and you know, we have, and I think of that because we see things in a very specific slant with regards to history, and often we privilege privacy, we privilege security in our interpretation of other art and other peoples and cultures that have gone before us, and there are thinkers who try to get us out of that vein. I think I've spoken on the show before. My favorite author, bar none, I know Grant and I have spoken at it at length, is Ursula Le Guin, and she often has and brings to, in her fantasy and science fiction, sort of notions that upend the social order, the sexual order.
Yeah, you know, I came across, by the way, just so you know, back in the day, one of the things I did is I was studying rhetoric at UC Berkeley, and her and many other, I mean, over the course of time, it's just amazing how many different insights and different facets of looking at the world we can get. And I mean, with the Native American stuff, it just goes on and on. That particular little tidbit that you gave me, I didn't know specifically about, but I will tell you something that connects Cabeza de Vaca to this ongoing story, and an ancestral medicine and Chinese medicine young person I know in Chihuahua City. Would you like to hear that story?
So, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, then it goes like this. That Cabeza de Vaca story that you shared. I mean, I kind of heard it, and I haven't seen the name in books. But when you read that story, you suddenly it just like that's like the like mother of all survival stories in America, as you know, in the story of America. I mean, it's like literally. And the more I studied this character, I realized he's part of a ongoing story of basically people coming from the West and getting like confronting the you know the new world as like literally an entirely new world. And that guy 1530s gets over here, has his crap, you know, has and so forth, and ends up getting on a raft, gets to Galveston where my grandfather was born, and then comes on land and gets, you know, the various things that happen. But that is an absolutely amazing story that he finally walks basically all the way across the United States without any maps, and you know, I mean, like just like literally on his own wits, and literally walks through Tarahumara land before he finally ends up in Culiacán in Sonora. So it's like, what the fuck? Never even had heard of this guy. And he basically, I mean, never had delved into like what he actually had accomplished in his survival. And you know, basically going native on the way, you know, by virtue of necessity, and then used his intelligence to sort of like he was basically gaming a trading, you know, routes and being able to do. He became like a really clever trader, and then ultimately, and this is where it ties in with my friend Gibbs over in Chihuahua City, he suddenly figures out he becomes like a frigging excellent witch doctor. I mean, he like realize he sees some of these shamans doing various things, and he realizes, holy shit, you know, I got some prayers and this and that, and he starts kind of imitating some of these witch doctors. He was, you know, as the terminology in the writing I was reading, and like, but adding some, you know, some Christian elements to it, and getting some work, getting some good work done. So he was getting popular, and he was using his popularity, and he was able to sort of like start, you know, actually being able to get some economic strength going, and he started doing these trades and stuff, and started learning about trade routes and different. And Lord have mercy, the guy basically, you know, I would say, wiggled his way into having one hell of an adventure, self-funded. I mean, I can't say it was a luxury adventure, but it really ties in with characters like, well, like you, Lucas, in your life. It sounds like you've sort of been sort of like one of these characters getting out there and like flopping down in different places and figuring out how to make it work, or vice versa, which I think is a great way to do it. I heard that when you were growing up, you had a lot of homestay students, and that's basically like traveling without having to go anywhere. And that's pretty much one of the great ways to, you know, it's basically like reading a book. Somebody comes and tells you all the wonders of where they're from, and you build the story in your own head. I mean, this is really quite a remarkable thing. So back to this interesting intergoing between the two peoples. There's also in that ancestral thing medicine area, my friend Gibbs is starting, there's like all kinds of things that went underground at the time when the conquistadors first came over. Many things were no longer acceptable. They were, you know, not good, and maybe there were plenty of things that were not good, by the way. I definitely wouldn't want to be a sacrificial victim in order to keep the gods happy. I mean, it's better, really. I think it probably was a pretty easy sell for many of the people that, you know, they've got this Jesus guy that'll do all the sacrificial bleeding for you all, and you guys can get back to just having families and enjoying your life again. Maybe was one of the possible, you know, secondary stories. But all before that, you know, there's these people over there that were doing extraordinary work with what's called lucid dreaming. Are you know, the Olmecs and the Toltecs? These are pre-Aztec folk who were very, very into, you know, of course there's all the alchemical and literally chemical tools that have been used for these journeys, and you guys kind of went in it to your on your shamanic talk recently. But it's a very, very sophisticated. I mean, just imagine you're an alien and you learn for the first time there's like, oh, there was something called literature on planet Earth. Oh, and here we're conjuring up a few of these. Oh, there's one and there's one and there's one. Well, in the realm of like tools that humans have been using to do investigations into these other realms, it turns out there's a lot. That's always been there in the oracles. You can have that back in the kind of the Greek world. But in this Toltec Olmec world, and also it goes down even to down into the Mayans, is you've seen that obsidian mirror, or sometimes the Mayans have they have a bronze thing filled with water to create a very, very pure reflective surface. And then they get into this meditative state where it's that shape where they're lying on their back, they're leaning forward with their torso, and their knees are bent. And in that little gap between their torso and their knees, they're holding a mirror and they're looking into it. This technology is really interesting because what it's about, and there's a modern guy in Mexico City teaching about it. His name is Magna, I think. Anyway, they were literally learning how to disappear. They're looking in the mirror, and the first thing they have to learn how to do is how to disappear themselves and just begin to see two fiery eyes. And then they go on these different steps, and ultimately they're going into, like entheogens would do for people, using something outside, bringing it in and letting it do the work. In this case, they're working from the inside and learning how to actually do that work themselves. And they begin to like it's quite you can imagine there would be masters in this art. And so my friend Gibbs is sort of like re-bringing into and reconnecting some of the not just entheogenic practices, but there's medicinal practices that are out there that might be useful into the modern world. So in the current shamanic, like north and south, there used to be like this division according to some shamanic traditions, and there were some guys down there. He became one of those Quechuan shamans. It's a whole study where they learn how to set out this very, very specific kind of quilt that's basically literally bat fur, yeah, woven into the what's called a universe. So it's like literally a pattern that describes the universe, and then they use these various chants and tools and things to try to sort of bring harmony. Those guys got together and started talking about the era that we're now in, that started I think it was October 2022 or maybe 2021. We've like literally gone into this in that world of the Olmecs, Toltecs, ultimately Aztecs. There's the Naal and the Tonal. There's the night and day worlds, the dream world and the day world. But back we have flipped into completely flipped now into, according to their calendar, the world of the opposite of what we've been. We came to an end of one particular era and we're now in this new one. This new era, according to them and other sources that I have, is very, very positive in the sense that more than ever before, and it turns out it literally is following in line with this sort of prophecy, more and more the capacity to turn your what you hope, basically to make what you're needing, wanting to become real, manifesting. It's an era of manifestation at a very higher level, higher frequency, and for a variety of different reasons would be the way I would say it. And my own look at it would say, wow, there's something to this. We could say that it is a time when those kind of things are coming out. And it was very interesting that it was said during that transition time, which has to do with their calendar is really focusing on eclipses and things like that. Those all aligned very well with a few things that happened over the course of the last, let's say 10 years. And so we're in that, and all that said and done, all these indicators are saying we're in a golden age. So I always love when you're starting to get signs and symbols that you can read that are positive. I think those are always good, just to put the vibe in people's step. It's always good when you have something to hope for. And I think we're in an era where hope is a smart new tool to use to actually live better.
And Mondo, I can't believe that you brought up the obsidian mirror. I'm a little bit obsessed with them, but I think I was not aware of the Nawa and the tonal aspect of them. That's it's very interesting to hear that sort of the dichotomy between our sleeping selves and our waking selves. And even going back to the E. E. Cummings poem that you started with, we wake up, every day is a new day.
Isn't that awesome? I mean, really, look, whoever invented the day, whoever, whatever, I swear they are deserving of the highest honors. They are deserving of the highest honors. If you didn't have that, you'd be in a miasma of quagmireless. You'd be just like, you'd be in like one of those endless, horrible dreams. That day is merciful. That's what it ultimately is. A day is merciful and glorious for that reason.
And Grant, you pulled up what's this 3D prompt that you pulled up?
Well,
Tomato plant.
it just made me think, because I always tend to like maybe overemphasize the technology aspects of things that are happening, although I very much appreciate the spiritual that we were talking about. But when we said we're living in an era of manifestation, got me thinking about this. So with 3D printers and AI, you can think something, have the AI help you express it into a 3D STL file. You can send that to your 3D printer, and it can literally manifest into reality something that you had the barest of thought of what you wanted. And as you start to have those interactions, you can then have a physical thing that exists. And as the 3D printers are going to start getting better, as we're getting into sintering metal and various exotic materials and whatnot, this is going to rapidly move into a point where you will be able to manifest something in reality through the printer technology. We are not in some distant future where that is going to happen. We're living in it right now, although the medium is this cheap plastic, but soon it's going to be all kinds of different stuff. So Mondo, you're 100% right. We're living in the era of manifestation.
The Toltec, the word Toltec is not what the Tawatzin were called, or the farmerish people, as the Mexica called them. The Toltec was with regards to rubber. Toltec means the people of the rubber ball. And
oh, that's right. They vulcanized. They were vulcanizers of rubber before vulcanization, weren't they?
Absolutely, and they vulcanized rubber with the tomato. The tomato was a New World plant. It was actually they used tomatoes, part of a family of nightshades, and
Right.
nightshades suck sulfur out of the ground. So they would take, if you've ever seen Wild Morning Glory, they would take Wild Morning Glory and stew that and distill the sulfur that it had taken out of the ground to vulcanize the rubber and make it malleable for their balls. And even when I think about this understanding of waking up from the dream and a separation of dream worlds and manifested worlds of the day, I think this was also part of their fascination with games, because games were a world of artificial rules. And you also brought up the ritualistic sacrifices, which we could get into great depth, but they didn't see death as they didn't see death as something that came at the end of life, but something that was alongside of life, which you can see in a lot of their iconography. Death existed alongside us, and they didn't believe that people who died necessarily left us for some great amount of time. But
Well, does that delve in? Is that what, when you talk about, like, I think that I think you defined yourself as sort of like a ghost chaser or something along those lines recently in an interview you did. And I'm curious, is that what you mean? In other words, you're kind of like trying to, you're looking at the world, you borrowing some of those tools to sort of, like, what does that mean if you had that attitude in modern American life? What does that mean? How do you, and I guess that's a ghost chaser. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there. What do you say?
well, I do, and maybe a lot of people in our culture today. There's notions of cemeteries of being dangerous places, and ghosts of being being hostile or not having the same goal as us. And I think that is a construct, and has negative effects on how we perceive the world and how we engage with other people. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so when I'm reading books, or even when I'm listening to other people speak, when I listen to politicians or whatnot, I try not to come to it from the aspect of this person is against me. I say, what is this person about? And and that holds true for books, but also when I'm thinking about characters who've lived in the past. I uh, I don't know. I try to step away from an egotistical aspect of it. And the question in that interview was, if I had a superpower, what would it be? I would love. I mean, going to this notion of being able to speak to spirits. That was something that was accepted. That's in part what the obsidian mirror was about.
Got it. Okay. And this is where the rubber meets the road. And this is what, by the way, the era that we're going into, and I've just had some interesting recent translations of some Raromudia Taromara stuff. By the way, the Kabaza guy walks through that territory on his way. So I was just like, whoa, that's so trippy. But there's so many indicators that and indeed getting people to get into the vibe of recognizing a kind of benevolence, in other words, that their ancestors, nature, the world, people, God, are sort of like not out there to get you, but actually, if you pay attention, we're all kind of together, sort of answering, we're all doing the work, which is basically, ideally, we're all dancing the dance of finding ways to actualize ourselves in a way that's meaningful, and at the same time being productive and useful for others, in the sense of like that dance of everybody's finding a way to fit in and find their competency. We talked about on the last time we chatted, I was have a friend who's going to be on a boat trip in Turkey in June with us. She's doing a postdoc work on what's called self-determination theory, which is a theory about human happiness. Remember, autonomy, competency, relatedness. And it's like being able to sort of find a way to find that voice for yourself in the world is one of the things that Mondo is like encourages people to do. And one of the best speakers of that is a guy named Howard Thurman. I mean, one of the little quotes that I love. And Howard Thurman was Martin Luther King Jr.'s mentor at Boston University, okay? And at Boston, Howard Thurman grew up in segregated Florida, got a scholarship to a Baptist university, and rose to become an incredible orator and thinker. And literally, here's the coolest thing about him: at Boston University in the 1962, a student who was in the PhD department where Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert were the head. He was doing his work on mysticism, and he created what's called, now known as, the God experiment. It's really cool. What they did is they took 23 theological students, and they put them in the March Chapel, where each Sunday or whatever, Howard Thurman would give his sermon. It's a great sermon, by the way. I think it's on YouTube. So Howard Thurman gives his Easter sermon. 23 students, theological students, have been given either a placebo or a heroic dose of psilocybin. And it becomes the longest longitudinal study of what happens after somebody has such a profound experience as these students did. And here's what happened. Howard Thurman, this guy I just told you, he's going to give the talk. But why is he coming to this talk? He has a phrase or a slogan or something that goes like this. He says, "Don't ask what the world needs. Instead, ask what makes you come alive and do that. Because what the world needs are people who have come alive." It's a great message. I love it. So anyway, he gets up there and he's giving his talk, and these kids, half of them are on a heroic dose of psilocybin, and they've never had any kind of such thing. And some of them have such profound experiences that they go on to make major contributions to their fields, and the rest is history. How do you like that story? Well, Lord have mercy. I believe I pulled the plug on the show.
Nope. It's just sometimes it's a minute to process
I'm
what you're
sorry.
saying. Nope, you didn't pull the plug, but you're definitely blowing minds for sure.
Yeah, so that's a great story right there. And of course, we know that that student, PhD student named Metzner, I think is his name, it turns out that his PhD thesis became this longitudinal study, which later on, an early tech guy who decided to put money back into the program over at Johns Hopkins and started that research again back on psychedelics because they'd been like completely quashed and smashed and made unacceptable and unavailable. There was one great book called The Spirit Molecule out of the University of New Mexico. Forget that guy's name. That's a very interesting book. He had some of the last opportunity to do federal research. By the way, throw all that shit out and let's do another way in the future. But nonetheless, he did this research on DMT where, wow, what he discovered there was quite amazing because these people and these tiny little like DMT is a molecule he calls the spirit molecule that, you know, is assumed to be sort of something that's being continuously created but not allowing to pass the blood brain barrier. And that's where some of the technologists who played with chemicals in the Amazonian forests figured out a way by combining a MAO inhibitor with a high concentrated DMT plant, two completely not related things, but figuring out how to at one and the same time make it so the blood brain barrier can allow molecules, certain molecules to pass through, DMT being one of them, and then giving yourself a massive dose of DMT creates these states that end up sounding very much like either alien abductions, near-death experiences, or things along those realms where you start having, you know, fairies and things like this. So it ends up that every human being, and indeed every mammal that has a pineal gland, has this repository of incredibly powerful psychedelic, you could say, chemicals ready and waiting to do its work when the time comes. And if you just interview any of the people in your family who've had a near-death experience, you will be hearing about an experience everyone, conceivably, will physiologically experience at the moment of very high hormetic threshold breaking stress that probably happens when you get birthed into a new life somewhere else somehow. We don't know how, but if you read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, one of the things it recommends at that point when you feel like you're getting ready to lose your ego and go somewhere else, the main message, and it's Jesus's message too, is do not fear. Give that a try.
You know, going back to also Howard Thurman, because you took me by surprise. I was literally leaning back and thinking about the statement "people who have come alive," and because I was not, you know, we have these versions of ourselves. We wake up every day, we start again, and just like pushes in software, you're a slightly different version. You're loading with different experiences every time. But there was a time, and I was actually in Durango, Rusty. I was in Durango, and I had moved to Durango, and somebody came up to me to speak to me on the street. And there was a time whenever I could take the tack of you know, urban people of just ignore somebody. Somebody comes up to you with some strange idea, and you just give them glazed eyes, stare at their forehead or whatever. But I thought to myself, I don't have anything to do today. I'll just listen to this person. I said, why don't we get a coffee? And we sat down and have a coffee, and I listened to some you know, some random person from off the street. We ended up having hours of conversation. And from that point in my life, I said, I will privilege and make time to have like very interested conversations with random strangers as often as I can. And it was unbelievable the difference that it made in my life to give people the benefit of the doubt and to, you know, to go on a walk with them and try to understand you know, whatever they wanted to convey.
Oh
And
yeah, that's you know, there's a kind of richness to that kind of, and it kind of is similar to this kind of conversation too, but there's a richness to that kind of, let's say, unstrategic, but nonetheless open to whatever kind of experience, kind of a little bit of a boundary melting experience, what you're doing, though, ultimately is you're creating a new and more authentic pool for your, let's say, LLM, for the lack of a better term, gets to uh, draw from. And I think that's why expansive experience is very, very good. Giving people an opportunity to take in and ideally in a way that's safe and friendly, but it's not all adventures aren't that way. Adventure, you don't know what's going to happen. So, but nonetheless, building experience is that ends up being the thing that you collect that actually gives you ultimately a richer sense of the experience of time. Whereas if you just do the same thing over and over and over again, actually time doesn't happen. I mean, Levi Strauss talks about that. There are certain kinds of peoples that don't live in time. They're just in a circle. Western man, we became the Faustian man. This is what Spengler calls us. Like, we are Faustian. We're willing to sell our soul to the devil in order to have all the experience, see all the things, taste all the tastes, know all the knowledge, and so forth and so on. And that Faustian man is not a circle, but on trying to like develop somewhere, go somewhere. But many people are circles. Circles are good too. They're calming. It's nice to be in a circle. Western man, it's also nice to strive and to excel and want to be at the cutting edge of what's happening next. So I guess we contain, as Whitman says, we contain masses. What can we say?
Mondo,
Absolutely.
that's fascinating stuff that you're bringing up. I mean, there's so much to unpack there just in something you dropped, right? Like where you said, if you have the same experiences over and over again, you're not even experiencing time. I was exposed to that idea personally that said the more that you have similar experiences, the more your brain just kind of skips over that. And so people who are just kind of swimming in a circle, they'll say, wow, time has just flown by. It's like, where did this last decade go? Where did this last year go? The way to combat that is to constantly have novel experiences where your brain does not just get to skip over it. It has to be forced into a state where it has to learn, it has to grow, it has to have an experience which is novel to it. And so then time starts to constrict. And I think anybody that has a baby for the first time will oftentimes experience this time dilation because you're doing something you've never had to do before. And suddenly all of your attention is on something and you are like responsible for this life, and time just goes, it just expands. And now it's like, oh my gosh, one day feels like a year.
Well, having a new daughter, bringing a new life into the world as a 60-year-old human being is pretty much one of the most profoundly awesome things I've ever been able to like be part of. I mean, being able to create an environment and to basically witness a new universe stepping into the universe, so to speak, and being able to just see how connected, right from the beginning, and how, I don't know, it's like my way of saying it lately has been like, of course I love nature. I mean, I am like every day, I mean, I am encouraging people to go outside and spend time out there, look at the sunset, look at the mountain, look at the, and so forth and so on. Of course, this is like fundamental for a healthy, happy human being, just as much as a running dog needs to like not be in a box all day. It needs to go out and run and do something so that it can be happy. But I'm telling you, I can miss a sunset. I can miss looking at a mountain. I can look at this little girl's eyes, and I swear it's like there is nothing that I can think of in the universe that I'd rather see than a smiling baby looking back at me. That is pretty much as good as it gets, as far as I can tell so far. Anybody want to jump in and say agree?
I'll agree with you on that 100%. We're almost out of time. I wanted to throw one last thing at you because I know time is really on your mind and something that I got exposed to recently. Check out this quote right here, Mondo. So this was coming from Fermilab, and they talk about that there is a constant speed that everybody's traveling, that everyone is traveling at the speed of light, but it's split between the spatial dimensions and the time dimension. And so you're trading between these two. I thought this was absolutely fascinating. This is not saying that you can travel through time or back in time. So if that's what it looks like is on the screen, that's not where we're going with this, but rather that there's this new concept that's come out from Fermilab about how this stuff actually interplays. and this might give you a bit more lore for how things are
I
going
will
with something
definitely
like this.
go down that rabbit hole, but can I give you a rabbit hole in exchange for your
Yes,
rabbit hole?
please. I love that.
So
That's
there's
like the
one, yeah,
currency
I've
in this
got a
show.
character, I found many years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I found a very interesting character through research I was doing at the time in something known as the plasma theory of cosmology. So it's like it's an argument that's making some kind of argument that essentially big G, gravity, is not the main mover and shaker of the universe, but rather this fourth state of matter known as plasma, and very, 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 very high discharges, and and there was some been interesting theories about this that got poo-pooed in the United States, and basically nobody knows about them. But there was this guy in Belarus. He was going to the equivalent of Caltech of Belarus. It was they're in Minsk. They're basically technical university, MIT, of the old Soviet Union, where they built all the rockets and stuff. And he was over there working on his PhD in plasma physics. And he started a YouTube channel called Eugene the Philosopher, with a T, Philosopher, which came from a Frank Zappa song, of all obscure and interesting things. And he's like a renegade scientist, social philosopher that most of the time is basically cannot be taken seriously. But Mondo got fascinated by him, and indeed, one of his talks called the lever, the lever of economics, or he did some talks on economics for me that were very insightful, that allowed me to discover Chia. So there is a connection to this guy. He is a trippy dude. It's always fun to find people who are outside your, just like you were saying, Lucas was saying how, you have this conversation, and now it's always good. And there's another guy actually on Twitter, X, named Brian Romley. He's in Southern California. He's a great inventor, and he's trying to literally program or train his AI with all kinds of obscure things that all the modern AIs didn't get. Like obscure video films that people filmed back in the day. And anyway, Eugene the Philosopher was a PhD student working on plasma physics, and he was contributing to these theories, other, let's say, renegade theories of physics that don't use gravity as the main thing. And it is a very interesting rabbit hole. There you have it. How's that for a ending for your show? You just made people have to have 2 or 3 extra lifetimes just to investigate even half of what we talked about today. Sorry about that, folks.
I love it. This was a great conversation. I always remark to Lucas, when we have you on the show, I feel like I look right, and then we're out of time, and it's not even like I don't even know what's going on, because the show comes to an end too fast, in my opinion. But loved having you on again, Mondo. Always a pleasure, and I'm super glad that we got to dive into all these different realms of mysticism and shamanism. It's a great follow-up for our first episode on this kind of subject, and we're hoping to do one on flow. So
Oh,
I don't,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, for sure. By the way, I see my NFT art is very much like a way of conjuring up sort of the feeling, the gestalt of what's happening in the world at a particular moment, and being able to sort of slam it down and get it into an NFT, something that's immutable and on the chain, to sort of help us sort of gauge what it was like from Mondo's perspective at that time, and creating an artifact at the same time. That's kind of been fun. I'm playing around with that idea of art has a place in time, and it helps maybe people when they're looking back. I think Mondo's period from basically August 15th until the election and after is a very, very, I was able to conjure up a lot of the sort of feeling of that time. And I think that collection in Mondo Rando really does a good way of preserving from one one specific corner of the universe, but nonetheless, making a lot of noise and creating a lot of imagery that I think might help people unpack what happened, what we were facing, and sort of the difference in being on this side of the equation now.
Well, we're definitely. I love when you come on the show, Mondo. Time has absolutely flown by. It's the Mondo conundrum. We want more time, but coming to a close to our listeners. Thanks for listening in. Find us on YouTube, subscribe to our show, like the videos if you like them. Please leave comments. And Mondo, we're taking some of your advice to heart. We're looking for a way to have a deeper conversation or more conversation with our listeners. But that's all in the works. So
Right on.
everyone, we'll see you. And Mondo, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Hey, you guys.